Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you again this week, continuing my series on the Enneagram, which is leading into the workshop that I'm doing here live in person, in the flesh, in Denver on April 26th. That workshop is called the Living Enneagram, Your Personal Roadmap. So if you're really getting down with all this Enneagram stuff that I've been talking about, if you are interested in identifying your Enneatype for sure, but then also learning about your Enneatype and maybe even starting down that little sort of journey of personal growth that the Enneagram sort of delineates for us, this workshop would be a really great chance for you to actually pick up that mantle and take your work with the Enneagram one step further. I'm going to have snacks there. So, let's just get that most important piece right out of the way. Also, anyone who signed up for the retreat, you're going to get help from me in identifying your type if you don't already know it before the workshop starts. So we'll have all of us together on the day of that workshop, already knowing what type we are and ready to hit the ground running with just so much learning and discovery. And I love the Enneagram, not just because it's fascinating and purposeful and interesting and teaches so much, but it's fun. Like people love personality tests, right? It makes sense. We like to feel seen and connected, and we like to feel like this sense of making sense and all of that stuff. So, you know, I'm not going to deny that there's just a really fun sort of navel gazing aspect about the Enneagram that is really, really just a good time. So I hope to see you. And if you want to learn more about the retreat, I keep saying retreat. And the reason why is because I've been thinking just this last couple of weeks about how I want to make this workshop feel a little bit like a little mini retreat experience for you. So now that's just what's in my brain. If you want to learn more about the workshop, I made a really easy link for you, which should be in the show notes and the video notes and all of that good stuff. But also, I'm going to tell it to you right now, and it's super easy to remember. So even if you're in your car driving, you'll be able to remember it later. It's bit.ly/living Enneagram. And today, what I want to talk about is a specific aspect of the Enneagram that it is specific, but it's also a big picture concept. You're going to be hearing from me over the next couple of weeks, different, very specific sort of micro aspects of the Enneagram. And today I kind of want to look at the Enneagram from a macro level. And talk about it in terms of it being a map. And what do I mean by that? A lot of people call the Enneagram a map of humanity or a map of the universe. It really is kind of a way for us to find where we are and where we're going and get some direction and all of that great stuff. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. But got to start with a confession. Those are the rules of this podcast. And I'm an Enneatype type 1, so I love rules, especially ones that I just make up arbitrarily and then force myself to follow religiously. So, the rule of this podcast is we start with a confession. It's called Confessions of a Parent Coach, so come on now. And what I'm going to talk about is the feeling of being lost. We're talking about a map here. It makes perfect sense for us to start with being a little bit directionless and lost. And I cannot tell you how many parents I have talked to over the years that describe a sense of losing themselves or not even being able to recognize themselves after they've become parents. And I think that there's kind of two aspects to that feeling of being lost. One aspect is the feeling of like I'm kind of facing a crossroads and I don't know what direction to go. It's hard to make a decision. I don't know what the solution is to this specific acute moment that I'm in. Should I take my kid out of school or should I, leave him in the same school that he's been in? Should I change the rules or should I double down on the rules? Should I stay with my partner? Should I leave my partner? I mean, we face big and little decisions all day long, and it can feel overwhelming and we can feel very lost in terms of like what the right direction to go is. But there's a second aspect to that word lost, and it's the loss of self. It's the feeling of not knowing who you are anymore, not being even able to recognize yourself. And that feeling is so familiar to so many new parents. And I myself felt that way 100% after my first kiddo was born. And that's kind of my confession for you today. Like, I was the first person in my friend group to have kids. I had no family that lived near me. And at the time, I wasn't super close with anyone in my family anyway. None of my siblings had kids. Like, I literally didn't know anybody else who was going through what I was going through. And I remember having my baby and kind of just getting settled in during that like sort of first week or two with Elijah. And one of my friends came over and she's like, well, how are you doing? And, this friend and I still are very close, and we were really close at the time. So and also I'm an open book, let's be honest. My whole show is called Confessions of a Parent Coach. If I had a hard time bearing all, I don't think I would have named my podcast that. So I told her the truth. I was like, I am really overwhelmed. I said, I just don't even know who I am anymore. Like, the person I am right now bears no resemblance to the person I was just a week ago. My body is unrecognizable to me. My day to day, like when I'm doing, throughout the day, totally different, 180 degrees. The dynamic between me and my husband, my relationship with my friends, my emotions, like my hormones. I was sweating. As I don't know, a lot of people don't tell you this, but after you have a baby, you get night sweats, or it's very common to get night sweats. And I would just wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. I didn't know that was going to happen to me. I was so like in the dark about what to expect out of motherhood. Like, I knew logically that after you have a baby, you bleed for a while afterwards. I knew that intellectually. I did not have one pad in my house. I did not have any of the stuff that I needed to like take care of me. It really was like everything. I just felt like I had been hit with a Mack truck. And I told all of this stuff to my friend who didn't have kids at that time. And, I don't fault her at all. Like I said, she and I are still thick as thieves. We're just such close friends, lifelong friends. But at the time, she didn't know what to say. And she said, well, I don't understand. This is what you wanted. And she had no clue that that was like the worst thing that anyone could say to probably any new mother, but definitely to me. I took from that like, tough titties, lady. This is what you signed up for, and no one's going to feel sorry for you. And also, from the outside, you have no problems. Your birth went fine. Your baby's healthy. Like, you're just doing life, right? And it just kind of helped me feel even more isolated and more completely lost in the woods. That feeling of being lost is very real. And, now when I look back on it, I'm kind of grateful that I had that experience because I used it so much when I started my business. I called it back up to my memory. And for example, when I started my group coaching program, I literally sat down and thought, what do I wish I would have had, back at that time? I wish I would have had friends that had kids. I wish I would have had a community, which is why it's a group program. I wish I would have had just literal information like do this, don't do that, which is why I teach parenting skills and how to give consequences and how to hold boundaries and what's developmentally appropriate and, all of those things, the actual discipline and parenting skills. And I wish I would have had somebody or some way to normalize and integrate and process the inner experience of what I was going through, the emotions, the rewiring of my brain, the new information that I was absorbing and how it was changing my worldview and changing my stories that I told myself and the confronting that we experience as parents. So much about parenthood confronts you. You're forced to contend with your unfinished business, whether it's something as simple as like, wow, okay, so this is what it's like when I don't sleep for 2 days. Never knew that before. Good to know. I guess I need to confront my behavior or confront my sleep hygiene or confront, my boundaries so that I can actually give myself time to sleep and set up a situation where it's possible for me to get some sleep, right? It could be something as simple as that. It could be something as, really profound and deep and even I would say earth shattering for some parents of the first time you lose your temper at your child and you realize like I never thought I would treat a child this way, definitely not my own child. you know there's an inner process that's going on as we navigate parenthood that I wanted support and needed support around too, and that's why my business is the way it is today. It's why my group program is set up the way that it is. So you know I made it through that lost feeling and don't feel that way anymore. But like I said, I feel like it was a very useful and sort of meant to be experience for me at the same time. I think it helps me be the coach that I am today. And how I found my way out of that lost quagmire was partly the Enneagram. Lots of things. Love and logic helped me, therapy helped me. And one of the things that I learned in therapy was about the Enneagram. And that was about 15 years ago. And I have been just studying and peeling back the layers of the Enneagram ever since. So let's talk about like how is the Enneagram a map and how could it possibly help you find your way out of the fog of motherhood or parenthood. Um, so, you already probably know a little bit about the Enneagram if you're still listening to this podcast episode. And definitely if you've listened to some of my previous episodes. And I actually want to reference a few of these past episodes in the interest of time. I don't want to go too much into all the different types today. I I've already done that in past episodes and I'm going to do that again in new ways in future episodes. So I'm going to just do a super brief kind of overview of the Enneagram types. And then I'm going to, really spend the majority of my time with you today talking about, like I said, that more macro level of the Enneagram. So in case you really are coming at this from a blank slate, the Enneagram is a system of understanding personalities. So, when the Enneagram was first introduced, it was called the Enneagram of personalities. And believe it or not, if you Google the Enneagram or you ever learn anything about the Enneagram, you will see the image of the Enneagram. The reason why it's called an Enneagram, gram means, an image, right? It started as an image before it wove in the psychology and science that turned it into a personality sort of rubric. So back in the day, many, many years before, the Enneagram of personalities was created, um, the layout, the image, the shape of the Enneagram was used in actual spiritual practices and dances, even spiritual dances, to sort of find, follow this flow into self discovery. And then later on, um, when the personality structures were overlaid onto this image, we have the Enneagram that we know about today. So truly thinking of the Enneagram as a map is not a stretch. It's not merely metaphor at all. So when I picture the Enneagram, I literally picture the image of the Enneagram kind of laying flat in front of me, like a plate almost, with all the 9 points that are on it. And but the Enneagram, in my mind, is not only a two-dimensional thing. We have that plane where you see that image, but from each of those 9 points, there are directions we can go. We can move from the different 9 points into some of the strengths and weaknesses and things of the other 9 points. So we can sort of move still in that two-dimensional space, but we also can move toward sort of self actualization, which I almost picture as these like kind of columns that come up from each of the 9 points, or like pathways up into sort of space from those 9 points. And, you can look at those paths both from a spiritual dimension and from a psychological dimension. You can look at them as sort of paths to self actualization, which is like a psychological term. It talks about integrating all the parts of yourself and being in sort of the healthiest version of yourself, and almost um, being not, I never like to say transcending the ego or ego death or anything like that, but being in a healthy relationship with your ego where you are free of your ego, not meaning that your ego doesn't exist or doesn't play a part in your life anymore, but that your ego isn't controlling you. You are free as an individual, like self with a capital S, to relate to and work with your ego in a healthy way. So that's self actualization. It's a psychological process, pursuit, terminology, all of that stuff. And I kind of picture those pathways coming up from all the 9 points on the map. You can also look at those paths coming up from those 9 points as a spiritual path, not to necessarily self actualization, but a path towards enlightenment, for example. If you read some of the more modern philosophers of our day, or even not modern philosophers of our day, but like the person that's popping in my mind right now is Eckhart Tolle. But, pick your person. All of them talk about this idea of like becoming one with the world around you, one with the people around you, realizing that we are all part of this unity. And that's more of a spiritual way to look at the growth path from those 9 points. But either way, there's a path for us to grow. And then I also see a path that's kind of going downward from that two-dimensional plane from each of those 9 points. And that's kind of the path that we go on when we're not doing well, when we become more and more identified with our ego, when our behaviors and our thought processes become more and more sort of mired in our ego structures and things like that. And so that would be like a path sort of like distancing ourselves from self-actualization or enlightenment. So that's kind of like the Enneagram in this sort of maybe three-dimensional visual that I hopefully have painted for you. Um, so when I talk about those 9 points, the way that people engage with the Enneagram mostly is to just really identify which of those points is most aligned with who they are, and that's their Enneagram type. And from that knowledge, everything else that I just described is available to you and sort of arises as you're ready for it. So when I first started studying the Enneagram and it and identified my type and all of that stuff, I probably spent, like, I don't know, at least like the first 5 to 7 years of my study of the Enneagram just learning about myself and my Enneatype, and briefly, like not quite at the same level, learning about my husband's type. And that was it. I couldn't even tell you any of the other types. Like I could tell you everything until your ears started bleeding about a type 1, because that's what I am. And I could tell you a lot about the type 2 because that's what Mike is. I couldn't tell you anything about a 7 or a 5 or anything else. I could only just tell you about types 1 and 2 for a really long time. And I really emphasize that whenever I talk about the Enneagram, because it's a lot that's available to you with the Enneagram. And sometimes it can feel like almost like this sort of sense of rush or urgency to be like, okay, cool, cool, cool. I know about my type, but what am I supposed to do with it? Or you can feel like, oh, I'm just so self absorbed. All I care about is just learning more and more about my type. And I'm not interested in all this other airy fairy stuff that Anne's talking about. What's the matter with me? I really like to dispel both of those feelings. Like, if you are feeling drawn to just exploring your type, please do so. And there is so much value there. This is why I like to talk about my own personal journey with the Enneagram. During those 5, 7, 10, who knows how many years I spent only really learning about my type and Mike's type, I grew so much from that. I can't put into words the feeling of clarity that came to me just even the first day that I was reading about my Enneagram type. In fact, I figured out what my type was, and then like that night I was like, Mike, you gotta, you know, hear this. And I started reading to him just from the website, about myself. And I just tears were like streaming down my face. I still have this vivid memory of sitting in front of my computer and reading to him, and just this feeling of recognition. Sometimes the way I describe it, it was like meeting myself for the first time, or just seeing my, like, a veil being lifted. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but when my babies were born, I think I might have had this experience all 4 times, but at least a couple times I had this experience of, like, the second I held my baby in my arms, like looking into their face and just being like, I know you. Like, you're meeting this baby for the first time. They've never even been on this planet before, but at, for some reason I still had this feeling of like, we know each other. Like, or it's like love at first sight or something like that. That just flash of like recognition or connection or like snapping into place or something like that. That was how it was for me learning about my Enia type. And that feeling doesn't come along every day. It is not to be rushed and it is not to be dismissed. So it is very, very, very valuable if you spend the next 3 years just learning about your Enia type and discovering more and more and more about yourself. Self awareness is not just the first step in personal growth, it's the most important step in personal growth. And when you meet someone who has a deep self awareness, you can tell right away. And it's because their presence is completely different. It is, somebody that you can actually have real, genuine connection with, you can be vulnerable with, you can be direct with, because they know you, they know themselves, and they know that that learning about themselves has value and all of those great things. So if, quote unquote, all you get from the Enneagram is, quote unquote, only learning your type and, doing that, quote unquote, navel gazing. And by the way, I'm purposely saying quote unquote about 100 times in this sentence. If that's all you get from the Enneagram, you are getting 10 times more than most people get out of life in general. And it is hugely valuable. So, you come to the workshop on the 26th, and, you know, it's like a thunderbolt of self recognition and exploration with the Enneagram. And when I start talking about some of these other aspects, you're like, I can't even take that in right now. I'm still, just with this type that I've found about myself. Awesome. That is exactly what you came for, and you got exactly what you needed. And that other stuff, it's not time for that yet. So when I do Enneagram coaching with people, we spend lots and lots and lots of time just, understanding, and I would say half of my time with some of my clients with the Enneagram is help me understand why I do this thing as a type 7, for example. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense that you would act this way. Knowing that you're a 7 means that these things are really important to you, that these things are really painful to you. It would make perfect sense for you to behave this way. Like, really understanding like why you do what you do, you know, what's going on internally for you? Um, Especially like, why do you keep finding yourself in these similar situations over and over again? Or myself, I've gotten to the point with certain challenges in my life that I still haven't managed to think myself out of a paper bag around. I I will say, like, I'm sick of the sound of my own voice on this issue, but I can't seem to get away from it. It's all sort of there and makes so much sense once you understand your type. And so this is why I'm so excited about the Enneagram. This is why I'm a person who likes new stuff. I'm always, sprinkling in variety and novelty into my life in all different ways. And since I have learned about the Enneagram, I have gone on to get certifications in multiple different coaching programs, taken trainings and courses in lots and lots and lots of different modalities, and I use them all and I love them all. But the Enneagram has always been a constant in my life. That's the one that, I never get bored of, and I never find anything that is more profound and more useful than this tool. So this is why when I first meet people and talk about the Enneagram and they don't know what it is, they ask me, "Oh, what is it?" I hate saying that it's a personality test because it's so much more than that. But I can't really say to someone I'm meeting casually at a dinner party everything I just said to you in this podcast because people's eyes would glaze over and they would walk away from me. So I usually say it's kind of like a personality test, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And, then it goes on to like really help you with your personal growth and stuff like that. But I kind of realized over time that by being so turned off by calling it a personality test, I think I was being kind of judgmental of that phase of exploring the Enneagram that is a personality test. And I mean, a really amazing, deep, profound, comprehensive, accurate personality test, but a personality test nonetheless. And that is a good thing. It is not something to be like, it's not really a personality test. Don't look over there. I want to give you permission. And I think it was a big transformation in my own work and in my own Enneagram coaching to give us all permission that looking at it as a personality test and just leaning into the personality test side of it is really, really good for us. It's not a problem at all. So I hope that listening to me and hearing the passion that I have for this teaching tool and guidance tool and thinking about it as a map and all of those great things has made you be even more excited to join me on the 26th and explore. And if you are far away, if you are not available on the 26th, remember that Enneagram work with me is always available to you. The workshop is just one way to get a little taste of that, but set up an Enneagram session. I'm happy to do a typing session with you. I'm happy to help you understand your type more. Maybe you know your type, but you're not sure about your instinct stacking. That's another thing we do sometimes in Enneagram sessions, or we can even just talk about whatever's going on in your life through the lens of the Enneagram. Why is that going on in your life? What would you like to be different about that situation? And how can the Enneagram point you in the right direction and give you specific tools on how to get there? I hope this has been a fruitful use of your time listening to the podcast today. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope it's helpful. And I hope I'll get to talk to you again next week. Next week, I'm actually looking at my notes right now, so I tell you the right thing. Next week, we are going to talk about that whole psychology and spirituality aspects of the Enneagram. And so stay tuned. Come back next week to talk about, what are the psychological aspects of the Enneagram? What are the spiritual aspects of the Enneagram? We're going to talk about spiritual bypassing, and we're going to talk about the need that psychology and spirituality have for each other. And that, in my opinion, is the Enneagram's hidden power because it combines both of those things. That's why it transcends a simple, Myers-Briggs test or something like that. So have a great week, everybody, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/KaplanCall, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.